What if I told you that some of the most common foods you eat every single day are quietly fueling prostate enlargement, without you ever feeling it happen? Most men believe prostate problems are simply a matter of age, something that shows up after 50 and slowly gets worse no matter what you do, but that belief is dangerously incomplete because the science now shows something far more powerful. Your daily diet is actively shaping the future of your prostate at a cellular level. Every meal you consume is either calming inflammation and stabilizing hormones, or it is pushing your body into a state where growth signals are constantly activated. And here's the part most people never hear. There are specific categories of foods that consistently disrupt this balance, creating the exact internal conditions that allow prostate tissue to grow, swell, and eventually become problematic. This is not about rare or extreme eating habits. These are everyday foods, things that look normal, taste familiar, and are consumed without a second thought. But once you understand what they are doing inside your body, you can never look at them the same way again. To understand why these foods are so powerful, you need to understand what is actually happening inside the prostate, because this is where most people are misled. The prostate does not enlarge randomly. It responds to signals, very specific biological triggers that tell cells when to grow, when to divide, and when to stop. And in prostate disease, two major forces take control of that system: chronic inflammation and hormonal imbalance. These are not separate problems. They work together, reinforcing each other in a cycle that becomes stronger over time. When inflammation remains active for too long, it creates a constant signal telling cells to repair and grow. At the same time, shifts in hormones amplify that signal, turning normal growth into excessive growth. The result is a gland that slowly increases in size, often without symptoms in the early stages, making it easy to ignore until the problem becomes difficult to reverse. Chronic inflammation is one of the most underestimated drivers of disease because it does not feel dramatic or immediate. It builds slowly, quietly, and continuously in the background. Inside your body, inflammatory molecules begin to circulate at higher levels, signaling your tissues to stay in a state of activation. These molecules act like messengers, encouraging cells to divide more frequently than they should. In the prostate, this leads to a gradual increase in both epithelial and stromal cell growth, which is exactly what defines benign prostatic hyperplasia. At the same time, this constant inflammatory state produces oxidative stress, damaging DNA and cellular structures. Over time, this creates instability, making the tissue more vulnerable to further dysfunction. What makes this especially concerning is that many dietary choices directly increase these inflammatory signals, meaning the process is not random, it is being fueled daily. Now layer on top of that the second major factor, hormonal imbalance, and the picture becomes even clearer. The prostate depends heavily on androgen hormones, particularly testosterone and its more potent form, dihydrotestosterone or DHT. This hormone drives growth in prostate cells by binding to specific receptors and activating gene expression. But the balance of hormones in your body is not fixed. It is influenced by age, body composition, and most importantly, diet. As men age, testosterone levels naturally decline, but another process begins to increase: the conversion of testosterone into estrogen through an enzyme called aromatase. When estrogen levels rise, they begin to act as additional growth signals, especially in the supportive tissue of the prostate. This creates a dual stimulation effect, where both androgen and estrogen pathways are pushing the gland toward enlargement. And this is where your daily food choices become critically important, because certain foods do not just affect one pathway, they disrupt both inflammation and hormone balance at the same time. They increase inflammatory markers while also altering the signals that control growth at a hormonal level. This creates a perfect storm inside the body, where cells are constantly being told to grow, divide, and expand beyond what is normal. Over time, this environment becomes self-sustaining, meaning even small triggers can keep the process going. But the most important thing to understand is this: if food can create that environment, it can also reverse it by removing the specific triggers that push your body in the wrong direction. You begin to restore balance at the deepest level, and that is where real prevention begins, not with medication, but with awareness and deliberate choice. Now let's begin with the first and one of the most damaging categories, red meat and processed meats, because this is where multiple harmful mechanisms combine at the same time, accelerating prostate dysfunction in ways most people never consider. It's not just about eating meat, it's about how often it's consumed, how it's cooked, and what happens inside your body afterward. When meat is exposed to high temperatures, especially grilling, frying, or broiling, it produces compounds known as heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. These compounds are not harmless byproducts, they are potent mutagens capable of damaging DNA within your cells. Over time, repeated exposure increases the risk of genetic instability inside the prostate. At the same time, red meat is rich in saturated fat, which fuels chronic inflammation, feeding directly into the inflammatory pathways that drive prostate enlargement. And when you add processed meats like bacon, sausages, or deli slices, the risk multiplies further due to nitrates and nitrites, which can convert into carcinogenic compounds inside the body. This creates a constant internal environment where damage, inflammation, and growth signals are all working together, pushing the prostate toward disease. Now let's move to what might be the most aggressive trigger of all, sugar and high glycemic carbohydrates, because this is where the body is pushed into a state of continuous growth signaling at a metabolic level. Every time you consume foods like sugary drinks, refined snacks, or high fructose products, your blood sugar spikes rapidly, forcing your body to release large amounts of insulin. At first, this is normal, but when it happens repeatedly, the system becomes overwhelmed, leading to insulin resistance and chronically elevated insulin levels. And here is the critical point. Insulin is not just a sugar-regulating hormone, it is also a growth signal. It works closely with insulin-like growth factor 1, IGF-1, a molecule that directly stimulates cell division. When these signals remain elevated, they push prostate cells into a constant state of growth, bypassing the body's natural regulatory controls. This creates a powerful environment where enlargement becomes almost inevitable over time. Now consider refined grains, because this is where many people unknowingly continue the same metabolic damage without realizing it. Foods like white bread, white rice, pasta, and processed flour products may not taste sweet, but inside your body, they behave almost exactly like sugar. They are rapidly broken down into glucose, triggering the same insulin spike and the same activation of IGF-1 pathways. What makes this even more problematic is the absence of fiber, because fiber normally slows down digestion and helps regulate blood sugar levels. Without it, glucose enters the bloodstream quickly, forcing the body into repeated cycles of insulin release over time. This creates a chronic state of metabolic stress, where your prostate is constantly receiving signals to grow and divide. This is not a one-time effect. It is a repeated daily pattern that gradually reshapes your internal environment. Now let's move to dairy, particularly high intake of whole milk, because this is where the connection becomes more subtle but equally powerful. Dairy products contain not only calcium, but also naturally occurring growth factors, including IGF-1. These compounds are designed to promote rapid growth, and when consumed regularly, they continue to stimulate those same growth pathways in your body. At the same time, excessive calcium intake may reduce levels of active vitamin D, which plays a protective role in controlling abnormal cell growth. This creates a situation where protective mechanisms are weakened while growth signals are amplified. Over time, this imbalance contributes to an environment where prostate tissue is more likely to expand beyond normal limits. Now let's talk about one of the most hidden drivers of inflammation, trans fats and industrial seed oils, because this is where modern dietary habits have shifted dramatically without most people realizing the long-term consequences. These oils, commonly found in processed foods, fried items, and packaged snacks, are extremely high in omega-6 fatty acids and very low in omega-3s. This imbalance creates a pro-inflammatory state inside the body, where inflammatory compounds are constantly being produced. These compounds directly irritate tissues, including the prostate, promoting swelling, cellular stress, and long-term dysfunction. Over time, this continuous inflammatory pressure creates the perfect environment for disease progression. What makes this especially concerning is how common these oils are, meaning exposure is often daily and unnoticed. Now let's move to alcohol, because this is one of the most underestimated disruptors of hormonal balance, and its effect on the prostate goes far beyond what most people realize. Alcohol doesn't just affect your liver in isolation, it interferes with the entire system responsible for regulating hormones in your body. Your liver plays a central role in breaking down excess estrogen, but when it is constantly stressed by alcohol, its efficiency drops. This means estrogen begins to accumulate in the bloodstream, and as we discussed earlier, elevated estrogen levels act as a powerful growth signal for prostate tissue. But it doesn't stop there. Alcohol also increases the activity of the aromatase enzyme, accelerating the conversion of testosterone into estrogen, further tipping the balance in the wrong direction. Over time, this creates a hormonal environment where growth signals dominate and natural regulation is weakened. Add to this the oxidative stress caused by alcohol metabolism, and you have a compound effect that promotes both inflammation and hormonal disruption simultaneously. Now let's return to something many people overlook: the way food is cooked, because even if you choose better ingredients, the method of preparation can completely change their impact on your body. When meats are cooked at very high temperatures until they become charred or well done, they form highly reactive compounds that can directly damage cellular DNA. These compounds are absorbed into the bloodstream and must be processed by the liver. But if detoxification is incomplete, they can circulate through the body and interact with sensitive tissues like the prostate. Over time, this repeated exposure increases the risk of mutations and abnormal cell behavior. What makes this especially concerning is how common these cooking methods are, particularly grilling and frying. The blackened edges that many people associate with flavor are actually concentrated sources of these harmful compounds. Now let's talk about caffeine, because while it may not directly drive prostate growth in the same way as other factors, it plays a major role in worsening symptoms, especially for men already dealing with enlargement. Caffeine acts as a stimulant and a diuretic, increasing urine production and making you feel the need to urinate more frequently. But more importantly, it directly irritates the bladder and urinary tract. This irritation causes the bladder muscles to contract more intensely, often creating a false sense of urgency even when the bladder is not full. For someone with an enlarged prostate, where urine flow is already restricted, this can make symptoms significantly worse. It leads to frequent trips to the bathroom, disrupted sleep, and a constant sense of discomfort. Now let's look at high sodium intake, because this is another factor that seems unrelated at first but has a direct impact on prostate symptoms and overall health. Diets high in salt are typically linked to blood pressure issues, but they also influence fluid balance in the body. When sodium levels are high, the body retains more water, which increases pressure on the urinary system. This leads to more frequent urination, particularly at night, which is one of the most common and disruptive symptoms of prostate enlargement. But the connection goes deeper than just fluid retention. High sodium intake is also linked to increased inflammatory markers and changes in hormonal regulation systems that affect blood pressure and tissue growth. Over time, this contributes to an internal environment that supports disease progression rather than stability. Now, when you step back and look at all of these factors together, a clear pattern begins to emerge. These foods are not acting independently. They are working together, creating a system where inflammation remains elevated, hormonal balance is disrupted, and growth signals are constantly activated. This is why prostate problems often develop gradually, because the body is being pushed in the same direction day after day. But the most important thing to understand is this: the same system that allows these problems to develop can also be reversed. When you remove these triggers, when you reduce inflammation and restore hormonal balance, your body begins to shift back towards stability. And that is where true prevention and recovery begin, not through a single change, but through a consistent pattern of choices that support your body instead of working against it. Now here's the turning point most people miss, because after hearing all of this, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, but the reality is far more empowering than it seems. Your body is not working against you, it is responding to the signals you give it every single day, the same biological systems that allow inflammation to rise and hormones to become unbalanced are the exact systems that can restore stability when the right conditions are created. The prostate is not fixed in a permanent state of decline. It is constantly adapting, and that means every change you make, every food you remove or replace, begins to shift the internal environment in a new direction. This is not about perfection. It is about consistency. When inflammatory triggers are reduced and growth signals are controlled, the body naturally begins to move toward balance again. What makes this even more powerful is that the benefits extend far beyond the prostate itself. When you reduce sugar intake, you improve insulin sensitivity. When you eliminate processed oils, you reduce systemic inflammation. When you balance your diet, you support cardiovascular health, metabolic function, and overall energy levels. This is why dietary change is not just a targeted intervention. It is a full body reset, and over time, these changes compound. Small improvements in inflammation and hormone balance begin to create larger effects, leading to noticeable differences in how your body feels and functions. The key is understanding that these results are not instant, but they are consistent when the system is supported properly. Now think about the long-term impact of continuing the same habits without change, because this is where the real risk lies. Chronic exposure to inflammatory foods and hormonal disruptors does not create sudden problems, it creates slow progression. The prostate gradually enlarges, symptoms slowly appear, and by the time discomfort becomes noticeable, the underlying process has already been active for years. This is why prevention must begin before symptoms become severe. Waiting for a problem to fully develop limits your options, while early action keeps the body responsive and adaptable. This is not about reacting to disease, it is about preventing the environment that allows it to grow. So the most important question is not what you should avoid, but what you will choose to change first, because transformation begins with a single decision. It could be reducing processed foods, switching to whole grains, limiting alcohol, or simply becoming aware of how often sugar enters your daily routine. Each step sends a different signal to your body, telling it to slow down inflammation, stabilize hormones, and restore balance. And once that process begins, it builds momentum. The more consistently you support your body, the more it responds in your favor. This is not about restriction, it is about control, taking back influence over a system that most people believe is out of their hands. At the end of the day, prostate health is not determined by chance. It is shaped by patterns of behavior, patterns of diet, and patterns of daily choices that accumulate over time. Surgery and medication may become necessary in certain cases, but they should never be the starting point when prevention is still possible. The most powerful changes happen long before intervention is required, in the quiet, consistent decisions made every day. When you understand how your body works, you stop guessing and start acting with intention. And that is where real control begins, not in reacting to problems, but in preventing them before they take hold.